Great to have you here at our public lecture series on sustainability in computer science. I'm very happy to introduce the speaker of today, Professor Krzysztof Pietrzak from the ISTA, the Institute of Science and Technology Austria. It sounds like a contradiction, sustainable blockchains, no? Because in the first kind of idea which comes into your mind is, oh, blockchains use a lot of energy. So I'm very much looking forward to your presentation, Krzysztof, and it's your floor.
Okay, thank you very much to this, I think, already third edition of this lecture series. So I will not only talk about sustainable blockchains, but about sustainability in the context of blockchains in general. So it will be a bit broader than in the past, maybe. Okay, sorry. Okay. So when we talk about blockchains, let me give you a little bit of context because, sorry, I just kind of want to move my window out. So now I see. Sorry. That's good. Okay. So when we talk about blockchains, then we should maybe see it in a historical development of increased decentralization of systems. So most systems in the past and actually even still today are centralized. So if you have like one central entity that takes care of some service, I don't know, a bank that manages my accounts. Now, instead of just having this one central entity, we could wish for maybe a bit more decentralization. So if we could have decentralized systems. In fact, this is a very old research area in computer science. And here the idea is to basically, instead of having like one single entity being in charge of a system, we have a set of fixed parties, maybe three, and we set the system up in a way so that even if some of the parties either misbehave or go offline or whatever, or are censored, the system still maintains its service. And blockchains, in particular Bitcoin, which is a so-called permissionless blockchains, even put this decentralization idea even further by having a system where we do not have even a fixed set of parties that maintain a system, but instead it's totally open. Everyone can participate in maintaining the system. Now, doing centralized systems or even decentralized systems can be done with computer science technologies that exist since the 80s, in particular standard cryptographic tools from the 80s, like multi-party computation. But what was really new with Bitcoin when it came up in, now it's already 15 years ago, was that it was fully permissionless. And I will tell you later what I mean by that. But let's first go back to the 80s and 90s. And because Bitcoin happens to be a cryptocurrency, I actually will show you like a centralized currency first. So in the 80s, people started to think, can we have something like digital money? And the first solutions were actually centralized. So David Chaum was like the most famous proponent of this. But even though they were centralized, they had like really cool properties. For example, they were completely anonymous in the sense that the bank could give me a coin. I could spend this coin with the seller, and then the seller could claim that coin back from the bank, but the bank would not be able to figure out that actually this seller, the coin that it claims back from the bank, was given to me and not to some other party. So this used techniques like blind signatures and others. There was a company, DigiCash, which didn't do so well, but probably was just ahead of its time. Now, instead of having like a central bank, as I mentioned before, we could use a decentralized systems, already using something like multi-party computation, again, cryptography from the 80s, and have, instead of one bank, have three banks which would emulate this single bank. And you could have a systems where this, your currency is online live, and you can withdraw coins and get your money back as long as sufficiently many of those banks remain online and live. Let's say 2 out of the 3 would be like a typical threshold. In the 80s and 90s, we also had like this movement of the cypherpunks, so this is the text that I took from Wikipedia, which says activists advocating widespread use of strong cryptography and privacy enhancing technologies as a route to social and political change. And they were actually dreaming of something that is even more decentralized than whatever decentralized as shown on the previous slide, namely something that is permissionless. So a system where, let's say for a currency, where everyone can participate, there is no way to censor, there is no way to shut it down, something like the internet. And this dream of those cypherpunks was realized to some extent in 2008, or 2009 when Bitcoin was launched. This paper here was published in 2008, and Satoshi Nakamoto, I say he, we don't of course know if it's a he or a she or a group of people. This is a pseudonym that still remains a kind of a mystery who this is. But whatever, Satoshi proposed a system that really is permissionless, and it implemented a digital currency. And how did he do that, or how do they or she do that? It came a bit as a surprise simply because it was actually proven to be impossible. So we know that if you want to have a digital currency or something, we need to solve the consensus problem, which means that we have to agree who holds how many coins and who spent which coins to whom and so on. And it's known that this is impossible in a permissionless setting where we don't have identities. Instead, everyone can just make up as many identities as they want. And I give you a 10-second proof of that. So assume we have some people, some Muppets here, for example, who would like to have this permissionless system, and a majority of them, like 5 out of those 6, are honest and would really like to participate. But then we have this lot count, and because the system does not have identities, lot count can simply pretend to be many people. So, for example, you would in a typical system, he would just generate many public keys of a signature key and pretend that each one belongs to a different party. In particular, he can make so many fake identities. I should call it identities. So many fake participants that he controls a majority of the system. And it's well known that if somebody controls a majority of a system, whatever that means, consensus is not possible. Now, what Satoshi suggested was that instead of using these identities, which everyone can kind of bootstrap as much as they want, we use something else for reaching agreement. So instead of voting, which like every participant or every identity has one vote, the voting is done with a resource, with an external resource. And in the case of Bitcoin, this external resource happens to be computing power. So, for example, let's assume that each party actually owns a laptop and everyone has some kind of computing power, and then they have a system where as long as the majority of the hashing power or computing power is controlled by parties who follow the protocol, the system is live and secure and everything. Now, maybe lot count here still can kind of cheat and pretend to be many parties, but he also would have to split up his computing power amongst his fake parties. So at the end of the day, he actually still would own a minority of the computing power and the system would be secure. Let me be a little bit more concrete. So the concrete proof system that Bitcoin uses to prove that parties actually waste computing power is called a proof of work. So you might have heard about this because this is actually a main reason why blockchains have this very bad vibe from a sustainability setting. So proofs of work were actually introduced way before Bitcoin in the early 90s by Dwork and Nahr, and the original application they had in mind was to prevent spam emails. So the idea would be that whenever I receive an email from a person I don't know, I would require that it's augmented with the proof of work, which shows that the party who has sent me these emails wasted some hashing computing power, say 10 seconds on the laptop, towards this particular mail. And this wouldn't be much of a deal for somebody who sends out a few or even a few hundred emails per day, but for a spammer who wants to send out billions, this would be actually, the cost might be actually bigger than the expected return. So how can Kermit here, for example, prove to Miss Piggy here, that he actually wasted some hashing power? So let's say he has this hash. So let H be a function. We will think of it as a cryptographic hash function. So just think of it as a function that behaves more or less like a random function. And Kermit would like to prove that he evaluated this function 1 billion times. Like a naive approach would be, so he evaluates this hash function 1 billion times and sends the entire function table to Miss Piggy. So this is, of course, terrible, huge communication, and Miss Piggy has to do as much computation to verify this hash table as Kermit has to compute it. So instead of doing that, the proof of work as used in Bitcoin is the following protocol. So Miss Piggy, it's a challenge response protocol. So Miss Piggy will actually pick a random challenge C, so that Kermit never, could not have predicted this challenge. Let's say a random bit string of 100 bits. He sends it to Kermit. And then Kermit has to find the proof, which is simply some value pi, such that if I hash this challenge C together with this proof, it starts with 9 zeros. If we think of this number now as being decimal. And okay, so Kermit will now start. He gets this challenge. He will start hashing many different identities until he finds some input value pi here that maps. So this green area here is the range of the inputs that map to some output which starts with 9 zeros. So once he found such a proof, he can simply send it over to Miss Piggy. And Miss Piggy just has to do one single hash query to verify this proof. So she evaluates this proof once, checks if it starts with 9 zeros, and accepts if and only if this is the case. And it's easy to prove that if we model this function h as a random function, like a billion queries are necessary and sufficient to find such a proof in expectation. Okay. Let me be more concrete how this proof of work is actually used in Bitcoin to achieve consensus. So we have a bunch of parties which are connected over a network. It's actually called the internet. And these parties have actually two functions. Most of the parties just want to exchange transactions. So we also have a distributed, so we have a data structure, which is a hash chain. So so that's where the name comes from. It's a blockchain. It's a sequence of blocks, each block referring to the previous block by including a hash of the previous block, which simply means that we can only append blocks to this hash chain, but we, for example, cannot replace this block here without changing this block at the end here. So this is a classical hash chain, nothing fancy at that point. And this hash chain is known to hopefully everybody in that network. And what the parties now do is parties who want to, I also say these blocks contain data. The data they contain actually records which public key holds how many coins. And if a party wants to spend some coins, so first of all, it has to be recorded that they actually own these coins. And then with the secret key corresponding to the public key that is recorded on the blockchain, they can sign a transaction and transfer this money to a new party. At that point, nothing happened yet. But there are other parties, the miners. Suddenly became small. Okay. There are the other party, the miners, who contribute computing power. And those parties try to add a block to the blockchain. So they collect these transactions from the networks. It's gossiped. They collect them in something that's called the mempool. And then they try to create a block with all those transactions. And every now and then a miner is successful and they can add a block. And then this block is added to the blockchain with these transactions and everyone moves on to the next. Everyone moves on. So this basically works as follows. So you have this blockchain. Everybody looks at the last block. It hashes it. This gives you a challenge, like a proof of work challenge. And then all those parties, they hash and hash and hash. And they hope to find this proof pi that starts with sufficiently many zeros. And at some point, one party is successful. So this party here, say, they found the block. This block is gossiped over the network and everybody gets a new challenge and they continue with this block. Okay. So now, why should this be secure? So the rationale is as follows. Assume I sold my bike. I got the transaction and I waited till this transaction got added to the blockchain. So I got this transaction. It was gossiped over the network. So a miner found it, added it to the mempool, and he created the block. Now, what could happen is maybe there was an attack. So what happened is the parties, I gave away my bike because I saw that my transaction was added in a block. But then actually the guy who sold me the bike, he managed to find another block and then he transferred the coins that I should get to another address so I cannot add this transaction again. And he added a few blocks on top. And now the Bitcoin protocol prescribes that whenever you see something like this, so this is called a fork, you should always consider the longest chain to be the correct one. So every party, all the honest parties will start extending the blockchain at this particular block. And my transaction will never be added again. So this is called a double spending attack. And Bitcoin prevents this with the following rationale. It says the following. When you have a transaction, you should maybe wait until you see a few blocks on top of your transaction. And then you can be secure that it's going to stay in the blockchain forever. Why is this the case? Yeah. So the assumption is that a majority of the hashing power, of the computing power, will behave honestly, and they really kind of worked on the chain that they saw. So the adversary who has less computing power, so maybe he has four CPUs, the honest parties have 9. He could have created a chain, but this chain will be almost certainly shorter than the chain of the honest parties if we wait for enough blocks. So this is just a probabilistic tail inequality argument, but that's basically the hand-wavy argument why Bitcoin is secure and prevents this particular attack, which is called double spending. Okay, that's all I wanted to say about this. I hope you have seen that in some other context before. So Bitcoin is fully permissionless because, as I mentioned, there is nothing. Let me go back here in this particular system. Everybody can just join. Everybody can buy a CPU or whatever hashing power and start participating in securing the blockchain. So it's totally permissionless. And the only assumption we have to make for security is that the majority of the hashing power is honest. This has some advantages and disadvantages with centralized or even permission systems. So permission simply means a decentralized system with a fixed set of parties maintaining it. So the advantages of permission systems are, of course, they are much more simpler to implement. They are much faster. They scale much better. But of course, it's not truly decentralized, or I should say, it's not permissionless. It's less transparent because you have to trust, who chooses the few parties who maintain the network and so on. While permissionless systems are open to all, so they've like this cypherpunk dream that it's everyone can participate. It's open. It's very hard to censor. Nobody can shut it down and so on. But of course, there is a cost of it, and it's exactly typically these permissionless systems are very hard to implement. They're very slow. They're very costly, and we will discuss this in a minute. Okay. So when we talk about blockchains and also blockchain research or types of blockchains that exist, there are maybe two main aspects that one should keep in mind, or that one should know of. So first of all, we have this what I was talking about until now. We have this what's called the consensus layer. So the consensus layer is really just a protocol that maintains this ever-growing chain of blocks and data that is added to it. And in this context, like terms like its throughput is important. We have the notion of finality or latency. So when I have a transaction, how long does it take until this transaction is added to the blockchain? And once it's added, how long do I have to wait to be sure that it will stay in there forever? So this is finality. And also in this context, this entire discussion between proof of work versus proof of stake, that's where this entire discussion somehow takes place. But then, apart from this data structure that keeps growing and adds data, it's also important what this data actually does, how it should be interpreted, and so on. So this is called the application layer. So this is actually what kind of data is being stored and managed on the blockchain. And in Bitcoin, this data were simply like set of transactions. So it's called UTXAs, the unspent transaction, unspent transaction, UTXA. Anyway, it's basically just a set of transactions which records. If I parse this set of transactions, I get like a list of public keys and the amount of coins that they hold. That's basically it. There are much more expressive blockchains. You probably have heard of Ethereum, which records something like smart contracts on chain, which is like a Turing complete language. So you can use a Turing complete language to write contracts, which can then manage arbitrary complicated contracts. Yeah. Okay. Okay, let's come to sustainability finally. So when we talk about sustainability of blockchains, most of the time people think of environmental sustainability, and probably this is also kind of the elephant in the room and the most important aspect. And in particular, when we talk about environmental sustainability, there are these issues of how much energy does it cost to maintain this blockchain? How much hardware is wasted for maintaining it? And the numbers look very bad compared to other systems, so that's why this is often discussed. But there are other issues with sustainability, which is not just environmental. For example, there is technological sustainability. Two aspects here are the scalability, as I will discuss in a second. Blockchains are very, very slow, so they can only process like a very small amount of data compared to centralized or even distributed but permission systems. There are issues like post-quantum security. Many current implementations will actually break down if we have scalable quantum computers. In some cases, like for signatures, this is not a problem because we have replacements for that. But for other primitives that are used in blockchains, like verifiable delay functions, we simply do not have good post-quantum candidates. So this might become an issue at some point. We have let's call it social sustainability or governmental sustainability. So this is the question of, okay, it's permissionless, but how permissionless is it actually in practice? If you actually run the system, is it true that even though it's permissionless, there are two guys who basically could shut it down if they wanted to? That would be bad. Or is it like really, really decentralized? And finally, maybe economic sustainability. So I told you that there are these miners who waste a lot of computing power to maintain the security of Bitcoin, but why do they do that in the first place? The reason they do that is that whenever they find a block, they are rewarded with Bitcoins. Now, if you do this, then you have some kind of inflation because the currency gets diluted even more and more. For this reason, the reward that you get in Bitcoin is actually halved every 4 years. So at some point in the future, there will be basically no rewards from adding blocks. And all the rewards that the miners will get comes from so-called transaction fees. So when I have a transaction, I want it to be added in the block, I have to give a little bit of that transaction to the party who will add my block. But there are reasons to believe that the blockchain like this will not be really secure. So this is another sort of economic questions, how to maintain this economic sustainability. I will not talk about this. So this was about the sustainability of blockchains, but there is another side of the medal, and blockchains themselves actually have found, and maybe in the future we'll find even more applications to help sustainability in many aspects. So I asked ChatGPT to make me a slide illustrating some of those, and I will actually come back to two of those aspects later. Okay, so let me start actually not with the environmental sustainability, which is the most important, but technological sustainability. So if you look at the system like Visa, which is a centralized payment system, it can handle something like 24,000 transactions per second, while Bitcoin only handles something like 7, because there is a block every 10 minutes. The blocks have like a pre-described size, and there's only so many transactions you can add. Of course, if we want a cryptocurrency or like a blockchain-based currency to be a replacement for a system like centralized systems like Visa, this has to be addressed. And science, so this is like a big, there are even workshops just dedicated to scalability of blockchains and so on. And there are many very clever ideas how the scalability issues can be addressed. And some existing blockchains do. So you see there really exist other systems like the Ripple that have a much bigger throughput. And I will just very shortly illustrate you these ideas. So first of all, there's the pedestrian idea. You say, okay, take Bitcoin, it doesn't have enough throughput, make bigger blocks or make blocks appear faster. You can do this, but only to some extent, because these blocks have to be gossiped through the network. Everybody has to verify everything. So you can only push this very naive idea so far. A slightly, or actually a much cleverer idea is so-called sharding. So the idea is here, instead of having one blockchain, you actually maintain many different blockchains, but in a very clever way, so that even though most parties only focus their work on one or few of those shards, the overall security of each individual shard is almost as good as if you only had one single blockchain. So this is sharding. I also don't want to go into that. And then there are so-called layer 2 solutions. So layer 1 solutions are solutions really on the blockchain itself. So it's really the actual blockchain. So sharding would be that, or bigger blocks would be like layer 1 solutions. And layer 2 solutions are solutions which increase the throughput of a blockchain by doing stuff off-chain. And I will mention maybe the two most important layer 2 solutions are rollups and payment networks. So rollups use something that, let's call it crypto magic, like very powerful cryptographic tools like zero-knowledge snarks, which are proof systems which allow you to take a big statement. For example, I have a commitment to the state, like a short commitment to the state of the blockchain at some point. I have another short commitment to the state of the blockchain at another point. And maybe there were 1 billion transactions going from here to here, but I can create a short, succinct proof that everyone can verify in no time on their computers, that proves to them that actually I know like 1 billion transactions that take the state from here to here. And if you're really just interested that this is the correct tip of the current blockchain and there exists a way to go from here to here, and you don't really need to know all the single transactions on that path, you might want to know some of them later, then you can ask people to open them individually for you. But this way you can actually roll up the entire blockchain into a very succinct proof and be convinced that this is indeed the correct state at the current time. So this is called a roll-up. And the other thing is payment networks. So if you see a shop which says that you can pay with Bitcoin there, what they typically mean is you can pay using Bitcoin Lightning. So this means the following. You can on-chain, I can add a transaction so let's say me and Gerti, we can open a channel. So both of us have Bitcoin, we can go on-chain and add a transaction which opens a channel between us two. With this channel, we can actually shift money between us back and forth. And later we can close the channel at the current state of the channel. Now, if many people have such channels, we have a network, and then I can transfer money through these channels to anybody who is connected in that network with me. So typically I will be connected to a bank, the banks will be connected with each other, and then, or some other services, and then I can reach other people, like say the shop owner through a sequence of hubs. So this way, actually, most of the payments, most of the transactions happen off-chain. People just sign transactions, and only when they actually want to close the channel, or if there is a dispute, if somebody tries to cheat, then you would actually have to go on-chain and close the channels. So this is Bitcoin Lightning. Okay, that's all I want to say about scaling. But let's come to the main issue, the environmental sustainability of blockchains. Now, if you go back and look at the original motivation or the original vision of Nakamoto, he was thinking of people, sitting in front of the laptops, and most of the time my CPU is actually just idle. And he was hoping that people would use the spare CPU cycles for securing this permissionless cryptocurrency. Now, this actually also was the case for the first, 2 years, where Bitcoin was basically under the radar of everyone. But as soon as it became slightly popular, people realized, using graphic cards, I can actually get 1 or 2 orders of magnitude more more rewards using the same amount of, let's say, electricity or even hardware cost. And a few years later, people started using field programmable gate arrays. And these days, the only way to actually mine Bitcoin is really using so-called ASICs, as application-specific integrated circuits. So this is really hardware. These are chips which were designed with the sole purpose of computing the hash function that is used in Bitcoin mining. And when I say it's the only way, the meaning is that if I actually want to have a profit, the only way is to actually use ASICs, and not even too old ones. Even if I use the ASICs that were used a few years ago, I will actually spend way more on electricity than my expected reward. Okay. So, which means that Bitcoin mining these days looks like this. So this is a warehouse somewhere in the Netherlands with lots of racks, and each of those racks has like tons of these ASICs, and just computes this Bitcoin hash function, trying to find the block and extending the block and getting the block reward. And not surprisingly, also because Bitcoin is so highly valued, there is lots of people willing to invest into this Bitcoin mining endeavor. And currently, the electricity waste of Bitcoin, the electricity based of Bitcoin is something like a mid-sized country like Poland or Thailand. So this is already like a few weeks old, but you get the general idea. And every single Bitcoin transaction, not every block, every transaction uses something like has a carbon footprint of something like almost half a ton of CO2, generates like 200 grams, almost 200 grams of hardware waste, because these ASICs, once you can use them for mining and then you throw them away. They have no other use. And yeah, so it's when people talk about sustainability in the context of blockchain, that's typically what they mean. And obviously, people started thinking, once Bitcoin became popular, people started thinking, can we have something that is maybe as permissionless and useful as Bitcoin without this gigantic footprint? And there is one major alternative that is very popular. So in proof of work, we basically have this resource which we use for voting, which is hashing power. So we have our work. And as long as the majority of the work is honest or follows the protocol, you have security. And the most popular alternative is called proof of stake. Now here the idea is the following, to say, what other resources around? Okay, we have a blockchain. This blockchain maybe implements some kind of cryptocurrency. So parties own coins, and maybe we can actually use those coins themselves as a resource for voting. So if I have twice as many coins, I have twice as much voting power and twice as much probability of actually winning the next block. It's a very nice idea, at least a priori, until you try to implement it. In fact, the second biggest after Bitcoin, the second most popular Bitcoin blockchain is called Ethereum, and they decided to switch from the original proof of work mining to proof of stake. It took them many, many years to actually pull this off, I think over 5 years. But once they did it, obviously, the energy consumption basically dropped massively. I mean, now the energy consumption is really just the electricity you need to verify it for all the participants, to verify the state, to gossip the networks and so on. But the mining itself, the securing, the consensus layer itself basically doesn't use any hardware or anything at all. Okay. Now, so, Ethereum switched to proof of stake. Why doesn't Bitcoin? And it probably never will. So there really are arguments for and against proof of stake. And many people are very strongly arguing for one side or the other. I'm not, but the reasons are, let's say, twofold. One is technological and one is maybe more societal. So technologically, it's really much, much more difficult to implement the blockchain using proof of stake rather than proof of work. And the reason is something called the nothing at stake problem that you might have heard in some context. So the rationale is the following. In proof of work, whenever I want to work towards extending a block, I have some computing power. I have focused all this computing power towards extending one particular block in one particular way. That's it. In the proof of stake system, once I have the resource, once I have the coins, it's very easy to try to extend many blocks or vote for, or to try for many inconsistent blocks. And for this reason, kind of, we don't have this nice convergence towards one single chain. So this is a technological problem. One has to make sure that parties are incentivized to really just work towards one chain. There are other issues like long range attacks. With, for example, I could have a lot of coins now. I spent my coins and then I don't have them anymore. But that's not really true because I still have coins which were worth something, let's say, a month ago. So I could go back this month and try to attack the blockchain from that point on and make a very long fork. If I manage to acquire a lot of those useless old keys of these coins, I still could make a chain which actually looks better than the actual current chain. Anyway. And then there are the societal issues like wealth concentration. Yeah, you get money if you already have a lot of money, and issues about that these kind of systems never can be truly decentralized. So a decade ago, in 2015, we were also thinking about this problem, and we thought, okay, if proof of work is it's an external resource which is so wasteful, and proof of stake, which is not an external resource but has all these issues, could we maybe use another external resource which would have a much smaller footprint than Bitcoin has? And obviously, a natural candidate for this is disk storage, because lots of people have lots of over-provisioned space on their, my laptop has a few hundred gigabytes free that I could use, for example, for securing a blockchain. And we came up with a system that's called proof of work, and let me shortly compare these three candidates. So proofs of work, proof of space, which I will outline to you in a second, and the proof of stake. So as mentioned before, the hashing power, the main difference between proof of work and proof of stake is that the hashing power is an external resource, whatever that means. So it's kind of really a physical thing that is there that is used to secure this digital currency, while the stake is really just something that's recorded on the chain. So it's called an internal resource. So disk space would be actually an external resource like proof of work are. So let's say that's good. Power consumption. So as said, work has by definition, a huge footprint, while proof of stake has basically none. And space, let's say, if it's implemented correctly in a way where one just has to initialize the space once, and once initialized, I only have to touch it, let's say, once an hour or something, make a few random lookups, then basically also the power consumption would be tiny, the footprint. What about the hardware? Okay, obviously, hard disks are hardware, like maybe ASICs, but there is still like a qualitative difference because disks, there is no such thing as application-specific disk space. You can have application-specific circuits which compute one particular function, but you cannot have application-specific disk. If you can store something, it seems to be very hard to imagine a storage solution that would be much, much cheaper if used for, let's say, securing a blockchain rather than just for general storage. Okay. So how does a proof of space look like? So I showed you before how a proof of work looks like. Proofs of space are actually much more tricky, even to define and to construct. So again, one could think of a very naive solution. Let's say Kermit wants to prove to Miss Piggy that he stores a terabyte of data. Miss Piggy could sample a random terabyte file, send it over to Kermit, and later she could ping him on a random index and verify that he stored the correct file. That's fine. I mean, the proof is very efficient, very low communication complexity. Miss Piggy has to store a huge file. Even this could be addressed by simply using a pseudorandom file, whatever that means. But the big issue is that the communication is huge. So in a blockchain context, who generates this huge random or pseudorandom file? That's not clear. So instead, what we want is that the prover itself locally generates this huge random looking or whatever file. And the construction that we had is using something that's called lower bounds, pebbling lower bounds on particular graphs. So very shortly, the general idea is as following. The protocol is parameterized by some very big graph that has a particular combinatorial structure. It's called depth robust, whatever that means. And then the prover Kermit would compute the labeling of this graph. This simply means that he computes a label for each node, where the label of a node, for example, the label of this node L4 here, is the hash of the labels of its parents. So this is an acyclic graph, so we can sequentially compute all the labels, and then Kermit would compute this giant file. And later, Piggy can just query him for random labels and verify that he stored the correct labels. So there needs to be some extra tools for Miss Piggy to be sure that she gets the correct label and so on. But that's the general idea. Okay. Now, this proof of space alone are actually not sufficient to replace proofs of work to get the blockchain like Bitcoin. We need also some notion of time. So there is another primitive that is called the verifiable delay function that is also kind of a active research topic in my group at ISTA. And these proofs of space and proofs of time can be combined together to actually get a provably secure blockchain. And there is such a blockchain. It's called the Chia network. So I'm involved with this as a scientific advisor, but this Chia blockchain has been launched back in 2021. It's a startup in San Francisco. The CEO of this blockchain is called Bram Cohen. He's the inventor of BitTorrent, for the older of you who might have used that when they were teenagers downloading movies or music. And it actually was when it was launched, it was actually very successful. It was successful to the extent that there was shortages of hard disks in parts of the world. I think mostly Southeast Asia. This, of course, wasn't the idea. Our idea was that people would use over-provisioned hard disks. And I also should say that this was also a very temporary effect. It really, once Chia kind of cooled down and the hype was over, actually pretty fast, did this leveled out. And Chia, from a sustainability perspective, Chia also collaborates with something that's called the Circular Drive Initiative. So this initiative has the following goal. If we look at where hard disks are used these days, to a large extent they're used in data centers. And in data centers, those hard disks are only used for a few years. And the reason is simply that after 3+ years, they start to be unreliable. And data centers really cannot afford disks to kind of frequently to fail or misbehave. So for these reasons, they basically just throw them away after 3 years. Now, for some applications, and I think proof of space mining is, we call it farming, not mining, because you basically most of the time you just wait till your coins grow. For Chia farming, for example, old hard disks are perfectly fine. Even if 10% of your disks fail, the only effect this has is that you get 10% less rewards. But other than that, the old disk is almost as good as a new one. So this is this initiative which kind of saves those hard disks from these data centers, and instead of kind of crushing them, they kind of can be repurposed, for example, for Chia mining. Okay, and let me even mention a third aspect of blockchain sustainability, which is this governance sustainability or social sustainability. Because hard disks are so widely distributed and there is no application-specific hard disks and so on. Oh no. Let me go back one step. So how do we measure how decentralized the system actually is? Because I said, okay, it's fully permissionless. Bitcoin is fully permissionless. Chia is fully permissionless. But which one is more permissionless, or whatever that means? So that there has been a very elegant notion proposed. I should have added the citation, but I forgot. That is called the Nakamoto coefficient. And the Nakamoto coefficient has a very simple definition. It's simply defined as the minimum number of entities. And these entities could be, for example, miners, or other parties participating in this system in a way, such that those parties together are enough to either disrupt consensus or compromise integrity, or in any other way break the security or liveness or of the system. And as it happens, even though there are many people, for example, participating in Bitcoin mining, those people are centralized in the sense that most of them participate in so-called pooled mining. So there are a few pools that collect a lot of those hashing power, and basically those pools then control what to do with this hashing power, and then they reward the parties for contributing this hashing. But there is just a very small number. I think you see this yellow line is something like, I don't know, 3-4. The 3-4 biggest pools together control more than half the hashing power. And in principle, if the people running those pools would sit together and decide, listen, guys, we're going to break the system, they could. For Chia, this Nakamoto coefficient was actually extremely good. It was way over 100. And the reason was simply, there were no big pools. The hard disks, you don't need specific hardware. You can just do mining on your laptop. Until this happened, so this was actually a very interesting lesson for us. So what happened here is the following: around 2023, no, in 2023, people figured out, or some people figured out a way to actually compress those plots by a little bit, almost a factor two, at the cost of using some computing power to compute these proofs of space. So there was a trade-off between compressing the space and using some additional computing power that somehow evaded us when we created the system. It had, the proofs of space, they had security proofs and everything, but this evaded us. And what happened is then this is called no SSD. This people who found this thing, they made this pool, and this pool gave this following service. So first of all, they took like 3.5% of the reward, so that's quite a lot. But they actually allowed, using this proprietary system that they would not share how to do it, they allowed to compress the plots by a factor of 2 or something like that. In this way, people participating with this pool would get 50% more reward than in all the other, or solo mining, or with all the other pools. And almost everyone flocked to those guys. And that's what happened with the at that point, a small number of the biggest pools actually was able, in principle, to break the integrity of the system. I mean, this issue has been fixed for a few months now, but we still wait to see the Nakamoto coefficients to bounce back, hopefully, in the future. Okay, so I have like maybe 5 more minutes, and in the last, or maybe 3-4 minutes, in the last 3-4 minutes, I actually want to talk about the other side of the medal that I mentioned before, namely how blockchains can help with sustainability. So let's take the first one, carbon credit trading. So there are applications related to sustainability where, if you think what blockchains offer, they seem to be the perfect tool for that. And in particular, what blockchains offer is there's it's somehow like a growing database that is totally transparent. Everyone can see what's on it. Unless you want a privacy blockchain, that's another story. If you don't want it, you can have this too. But typically, or it's easy to make it so that everyone can really see all the transactions. And if you have enough functionality on the application, you can, for example, have nice auctions or other means of, for example, trading carbon credits. So carbon credits, if you don't know what it is, we have this agreement that we want to lower our CO2 output. And what happens is that companies get these carbon credits, and if they use less or more, so if they produce less or more CO2 than they should, then they have credits for it. They have to either buy or sell those credits. And this way they are incentivized to actually save this, save on carbon emissions. And there is no good market for this because different countries have different systems. It's incoherent. You don't really know if the carbon credit you want to buy has already been sold to 10 other companies and things like that. So a blockchain seems to be a very good platform for this. And indeed, the World Bank has something that's called the Climate Warehouse. And this is exactly such a public data layer for carbon market. So it's a market, you can deal your carbon credits, everyone can check that they are there and so on. And this particular Climate Warehouse uses the Chia blockchain as the underlying platform for doing these trades. If you're interested in this, there is this 5-minute video that you can watch. I mean, it is a sales pitch, of course, but it's very well made. So, and let me come to the last item. So when I asked ChatGPT to make me this picture illustrating how blockchains can help sustainability, I think it missed one important aspect, which is DePIN, which stands for, so it's copied on Wikipedia, decentralized physical infrastructure networks. So the idea here is the following. We have many networks, so we have many things that are very centralized. For example, if I want cloud storage, I have to go to Amazon Cloud, and there is this one provider that stores the file for me. But what DePIN tries to do is to decentralize these systems in the sense that we have a lot of people who have, maybe I have some hard disk space that I would be willing to store somebody's pictures or whatever other data on my hard disk. And other people have data that they would like to have stored, maybe even in a redundant way, so that they can be sure that it never gets lost. But you somehow have to bring those people together, and this is very difficult. And the blockchain is actually a very good platform for this, because on a blockchain you can announce, look, I have storage, and people who look for storage can find those people and store the files on that system. And there are many challenges with these DePIN networks. For example, with the storage example, it's very hard. A main challenge is to prove that you actually provide the storage, that you really store these files in a redundant way locally. And to do it is, I just want to mention one of those DePIN projects that exists, which is Filecoin. And Filecoin is exactly what I mentioned before. It's a decentralized storage network, and it uses actually proofs of space that I mentioned before that have originally been invented for the consensus layer of a sustainable blockchain. But here, these proofs of space are used for a totally different reason. Here, these proofs of space are actually used to prove that you actually provide the storage, that you store the files that you're supposed to store locally in a redundant way. Yeah, and then there are many other application cases that one can think of. Wi-Fi networks, I think, are one. You can prove that you provide the Wi-Fi network at a particular location and things like that. So I think this is going to be a major, yeah, hopefully a major area of future research that I also want to get into. Okay, that's it. It's 45 minutes, so I think just in time. No, I'm happy to take questions.
Krzysztof, thank you very much. Um, I always say that it's I don't have to read crime stories because these presentations are kind of thrilling enough. So people can ask or they write questions in the chat, and before they start or before they make up your mind, I would have two questions. And I really have learned about Chia. Perhaps you had this also in your last presentation, then I don't remember, excuse me. What is the status of Chia now? You were saying that it is underlying this the DePIN or DePIN network. Do you have commercial customers also?
So I have to say that I'm barely involved. I was involved when we made the consensus layer with the proof systems, everything. So I'm still involved managing that. I don't know more about the application layer other than what is available publicly, and I can follow the chats they have. Currently, there is a team, I think something like 20 engineers or more, who are developing mostly the application layer now. So they invent tools for. So there is gaming is one thing. They want to do gaming on chain. That's an important thing. Another application is the interbank exchange stuff, and also kind of so the latest application is something that has to do with I'm not an expert here with stock markets. So when you want to buy stock, but you only are interested, say, in the stock, but not in the dividends, or the other way around. So you can just buy one of the two things, and people can split up because some people for political or whatever tax reasons don't want to get the dividends. They just want to bet on the share going back or down, and other people just want the dividends and not be concerned about the things. So these kind of systems to kind of manage these kind of things. But this is going all on the application layer. I think if Chia is going to be successful in the long term, it's the same answer as last year. I don't know. It's kind of, it exists. There is a very active ongoing development. And I think if it's going to be successful or not is at this point probably really depending if there is enough, if there's going to be enough interest in the application layer applications that it will provide. So I'm very happy that I'm not involved with this, because I think that's kind of very stressful to acquire customers, kind of I think that's a general thing. Like technologically, it's not necessary. I think technologically, it's a unique thing, right? There is no other. I mean, there are clones of Chia and so on, but I think there is no other serious candidate that would have an external resource and be as sustainable as Chia is for what it does. So this is a interesting point between proof of works chains or proof of stakes. So if you really want an external resource and you don't want to use proof of work, so that's, I think, the way to go. But if it's really going to take off, that's going to depend on whether the people actually manage to create enough of a business model for it.
Yeah. And my second question would be concerning this decentralized physical infrastructure network, this DePIN. I think this is interesting. When I understand it correctly, it's really like, kind of offering unused digital resources, whatever.
Yeah. Making a market for resources that are currently centralized, like electricity or storage or something like that. Just having a lot of people who also Wi-Fi networks and so on, having a market for this. And because it's so decentralized, it's very hard to, centralizing a centralized system is much easier, but as it happens, those resources actually are decentralized. Like people create electricity locally, and then
Yeah.
also, so this is a very interesting. I'm interested in it because a key component that will be used there is exactly you have to prove that you provide the resource.
Yeah.
Right? So we have this for disk space. It's a proof of space. But we actually even you have to, for example, you could also provide the resource which is connected to a location. For example, you provide Wi-Fi at a particular location. Then you somehow need maybe ideas from position-based cryptography, which is a cryptographic tool where you actually prove that you are at a particular location. And I think there are lots of kind of these type of cryptographic proof systems for physical resources that could be there that we want to look into.
Because also it's a kind of democratic way, or it helps people. It empowers people, in fact, and communities perhaps also. Yeah,
exactly. That's the cypherpunk dream. Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
You will really have, if it would work smoothly and well, you would have a much more efficient and non-monopolized markets and so on. So yeah, it's interesting.
Perhaps this is too. Perhaps looking at today's geopolitical situation, perhaps we are a dreamer.
Yeah.
So, either they are all sleeping or all questions answered. Apparently, there are no questions from other people. Just a last one, perhaps I also ask it every year. Will we ever have digital currency instead of, our cash?
I mean, people use Bitcoin Lite in some countries. It's accepted current, like I said, I think some South American countries and so on. So in principle, technologically, it's I think possible by now. Also, kind of the throughput questions have been, I think, can be handled. I mean,
Going to the grocery and buying my my lunch.
I mean, I think there are countries where this is already the case.
Okay.
So you could, yeah. If we have I mean, the reason really is, we trust our banking system. It's convenient. If you,
This is
centralized
deep.
solution, I think there is this flow chart, right? You need the blockchain and it just has one arrow, says no.
Exactly.
It's kind of, right? So it really, there are use cases, but they are not as prevalent as maybe one might think. Isn't that the digital euro? Somebody asks. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, this is the digital euro, but the digital euro would be permissioned, right? It's kind of, this would not be a permissionless blockchain. So when I say blockchain, I mean permissionless. So this is the digital euro. I mean, permission blockchains are something we could have done in the 80s. I mean, we had multi-party computing. So it was it's kind of like going full circle. So nobody cared about distributed computing until it was permissionless, and it was cool. Then people realized, oh, we want the blockchain, but actually we don't need it. Like a distributed system is perfectly fine. And you can still call it permission blockchain. You can still call it blockchain, and then people are happy with that. It's fine.
So somebody raised the hand. Ventura Herr.
Hi, yeah, I just wanted to add to that I'm actually from El Salvador, and yeah, there it's officially used Bitcoin as currency, actually. And I mean, in day-to-day life, of course, for a lot of stores, it really doesn't work, but I mean, for other uses, so for example, particularly in my case, I used it a lot to move money from here. So when I'm traveling over there visiting my family, it's actually very convenient. So you don't have to pay, the bank fees and stuff. So yeah, I think it's maybe not so widespread yet, but it's definitely already at some level, already in use. Just wanted to add that as a contribution of my personal experience, of course.
So exactly in countries where people don't trust the banking system because it's very widespread. So somebody asked, with this kind of huge energy consumption, how will the future of blockchains like Bitcoin? I think Bitcoin at this point is by far the biggest proof of work based blockchain. All the other ones are way smaller. I don't think that this is for it. It cannot stay at that level for a very long time. So this, I really don't know what's going to happen with Bitcoin. It shouldn't stay forever because it's not sustainable, right? It's not like having physical gold and then thinking I can sell it in 1,000 years. Bitcoin is not going to be there in 1,000 years. It's just not. I don't know. I don't know how much it will go up before it crashes, but it's just technologically, it's no. People use it as a means of storing money, but it's kind of a means of storing money where storing is extremely expensive all the time, right? You could think of it as, I don't know, like you have gold, but this gold has to be constantly in a truck that runs around the world or something like that. So it makes no sense. So I don't know. But when I read the Nakamoto white paper, whatever, 15 years ago, it didn't make sense back then. It still doesn't make too much sense now, but apparently this permissionless decentralization thing is so important, and people put it's such a cool thing to have. And if you think about it, actually, it's really cool that even the fact that Bitcoin was slow, extremely expensive to maintain, very impractical, everything kind of not private at all, right? The transactions are shown. That was totally overruled by the fact that it's permissionless and kind of nobody can censor you or shut you down. And
Are blockchains secure? I mean, you brought this at the beginning, but at the same time, I know that especially in our faculty, there are some PhD topics on this, making blockchains more secure.
This is often on the application layer, right? So exactly. Okay. So you have all these smart contracts, which basically code this law. What is coded there is true. And in particular, if you find like a loophole, then you can often just drain huge amounts of money from contracts and things like that, which doesn't that much happen in the physical, in our real world, because somehow banks see, oh, something fishy is going on. I'm stopping these transactions. Maybe you can roll it even back and things like that. In blockchains, you can't. Right, it's kind of once you make a mistake in your smart contract or something, you can just lose everything, and or people can just lose their keys. Right, it's public keys. People are sloppy with storing them, and there is social engineering to get, even if the keys are kind of shared amongst people. There have been major cases where with social engineering they managed to get enough shares to. So it's
okay.
Code is law. That's the issue. That's kind of is very brittle. But I don't think that any major blockchain has really been broken in the sense that there was like, physical double spending. You see like a Bitcoin double spend or things like that. This has not been observed.
Krzysztof, thanks for your presentation. I guess all questions answered.
Thanks everyone for listening.
We have learned again a lot. Thank you to the participants for attending the lecture. Spread the word that we are not only the problem maker, but also the solution provider. And see you next time. Thank you very much.
See you next year, I guess.
Bye.
Bye.